I can't wait to get into a little bit of the Harlem Renaissance. Yes. So let's start at the beginning. The Harlem Renaissance, as you'll see, is kind of a marriage of two different timelines and two different stories. The first is the United States as a whole, and the second one is African Americans in the United States. The United States, as you know, starts around 1607 with the formation and the foundation of a settlement called Jamestown. From there, the United States fought to get its independence from Britain. This included a Boston Tea Party and a whole war where many lives were lost, which ended up, well, not all the way, but almost toward the end of that Revolutionary War in 1783. A few years before, in 1776, the United States declared themselves free with the Declaration of Independence. Now, the Declaration of Independence asserted life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness from every inhabitant of the United States of America. Now, naturally, this is a little problematic because not only that, it guaranteed everyone the unalienable right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, again, this is a little problematic. Where's the women? And not to mention, the United States just had a itty tiny little bit of problem. The United States still, and almost for the next 100 years, would be a society that practiced slavery. So on the one hand, it was promising freedom, liberty, unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But so many human beings were denied the right of even being human. This went on for another 100 years, almost, until the Civil War came along and the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. And then ultimately slavery was freed with the 13th Amendment. Now, the 13th Amendment didn't free everyone because not everyone knew. Now, there was a ride that went through Galveston, Texas, that finally let the last U.S. citizens know that slavery had been freed, and finally, all African Americans could practice life as a free human being. We celebrate this, we commemorate this with Juneteenth or June 19th. Now, enslavement was interesting for African Americans, and I don't want to just write the people off as slaves. This is a gross misconception of what those people were. Those people were skilled laborers. They were blacksmiths, they were tailors, they were gourmet chefs, they were master gardeners. These people were geniuses. Not to mention that in the times where they did run, they could get from the hills of Tennessee to the freedom of Canada with no maps, no Siri, and no GPS. Some of us can't even get to the store without calling on Siri's help. Enslavement was an institution unlike anything the earth has ever seen. In those times, African Americans had no records. There were no birth certificates, no marriage certificates, there were no death certificates. We weren't important enough to have records, written records of any kind, except to be mentioned among bags of rice and other cargo. Writing, literacy was a big deal, and it was punishable by death. Any slave caught trying to read, or anybody caught trying to teach an enslaved person to read, was also punished by death. Think about that. I and many other African Americans all around the country have ancestors, and we don't know what they thought about, what they laughed about, who their best friends were. We have no records. Nobody could write their inner thoughts, dreams, desires down, their fears. We don't know any of those things. Now, it wasn't that African Americans let me back up. It wasn't that no African Americans wrote, because there were some exceptions. Certainly, there was Frederick Douglass, there was Martin Delany, there was Phillis Wheatley. But there were women, right? There were women and men that did write back then, even though it was a rare occasion and it was far and few in between. Let us not forget about Sojourner Truth, who wrote Ain't I a Woman? Because back in those days, in like the 1800s, women started their women's movement and they started to petition for the right to vote. African American women were. Now, someone else who was writing at the time that I cannot listen, I'd be remiss not to mention, is Ida B. Wells, who wrote the Red Records. So I mentioned Martin Delany, I mentioned Frederick Douglass, I mentioned uh, uh, Phillis Wheatley. But listen, I gotta mention this sister. She was from Tennessee, Memphis, and she left Memphis to go to other places that weren't so. Again, the South was really different, y'all. It was just different. So she left and she started to give record to excuse me, let me back up because listen. She started to give voice and record to the violence that African Americans suffered. She recorded lynchings, which were, listen, y'all, can I say, wow? But lynchings were hangings of African Americans, male and female, and they represent some of the most brutal times in our history. Actually, there were even barbecues held around these lynchings. There were postcards made out of them and just big, huge events, right? Picnics. Some even say that's where you get the name picnic from. Look, put it together, picnic. Anyway, to move right on from that, she starts to put these things down on record. They're called the Red Records, which document all the names lost of these people. And there's a if I'm not mistaken, I think it's in Alabama, but there is a whole museum for lynchings now. And just in 2020, lynching was made illegal. 2020. Mind blowing, right? But I would be remiss not to mention her, so I had to throw her in there with her writing. And this year, she just now won the Pulitzer Prize. Sister Ida B. Wells, hey, just won the Pulitzer Prize for her writing. So I'm so proud, and I'd be remiss not to throw her in there. So again, African Americans, listen, you get all that joy, you get to really celebrate our music on the mainframe, on the main stage. And again, okay, let me go back, because y'all know I get really excited. And let me tell you, if you ever want to be an English major in school, you're going to learn everything else. You kind of get to become a history major and a science major too, because we read everything. And then we have to understand the background of everything we read. So yeah, shout out to all the English majors out there. So anyway, I got to go back and tell you this. What's really interesting about the Harlem Renaissance is that the writers are the sons and daughters of the first people to go to college. These people were the second generation to not be enslaved, and they were the second generation to actually get into formal schooling, which guaranteed the right to read and write to formerly enslaved inhabitants of the United States. So right around the 1800s, you start to see these schools pop up. In colleges, they're called HBCUs, or historically black colleges and or universities. Now, the first one pops up just before slavery is ended in Pennsylvania. But others of them start to pop up right after slavery. And these are the places where African Americans come from far and wide to be educated. Now, it wasn't that we couldn't go to white schools, because some of us broke through that barrier, like W.E.B. Du Bois. But again, it was rare. We had African American places to go get educated, right? One of those such places was the first university in Nashville. Nashville. It was. It predates Vanderbilt, y'all. It was Fisk University. So the cool thing about Fisk University is that it was built on former land that was used in enslavement. In fact, one of the pieces of land right outside Jubilee Hall is where they used to auction slaves or in people that were enslaved. Let's not just call them slaves, folks. I don't think it does them justice, but more on that later. So we get these people, they had to keep their university's doors open. It wasn't like people were throwing them money. So the guy who was the president at the time, he's walking around, he's like, what can we do? Right? How are we going to keep these doors open? Where are we going to get some money? And he heard some singing. Listen. He goes and he says, can y'all do that again? And they go, sure. Whoa! They sounded better than me, y'all. But they were like these angelic singers. So they do what any good singer does. They went on tour. And that's how they kept the doors open. But when they went on tour, it was hard work because nobody was listening. They would get so much disrespect. Like, plates was clinging. So the president of Fisk at the time passed by and he heard these angelic voices. Whoa! He says, oh my gosh, you guys think you could do that? Like on tour? And they were like, yeah. So they do what any good singer does and they went on tour. The problem was nobody was listening. And I mean nobody. Plates were clinging, teacups were clinging, people were talking all over the place. And they were up there, whoa, la, la, and nobody was listening. It was so annoying. It was mad annoying. So you know what they did? They stopped. And they started singing the other way. Like the way they sang at home. They got down with it. Like with spirituals. Or what W.E.B. Du Bois calls the sorrow songs. And when they did that, can you guess what happened? You guessed it. People were quiet. In fact, you could hear a pin drop. And that singing is what got them more and more gigs. That singing took them all the way to London. Yes, people, to London. And you know who invited them? The Queen's brother. So they went to sing for the Queen's brother. And they were in there singing their little hearts out. And the Queen passes by. She's like, what is that I'm hearing? So she pops in. She listens a little bit more closely. And then she says, oh my gosh, these people sound beautiful. Where are these? What is this? So, and y'all have to forgive my bad accent. But anyway, so her brother says, oh yes, I thought I'd bring them here for a little bit of music. These people are from Fisk University. She says, Fisk University? And where is that? All the way in the United States. Fisk University is in Nashville. She says, oh my gosh, it's in Nashville. Well, these people have such glorious voices that they must be from the Music City. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how the Music City, or Nashville, got its nickname. You get a people one full generation out of slavery. And what do you get? You get the Harlem Renaissance. You get dances and songs and essays and oh my gosh, there's so much. But you get these beautiful pieces of writing, which brings us to one of the pieces that we're going to read about, the star of our unit, and is, drum roll please, their eyes were watching God. Now listen, y'all, when I say this is one of my favorite books. No, seriously, favorite books. First of all, Zora Neale Hurston is a goat. A whole goat. Make no mistake about it. Though at the time, people didn't want to give her props because she was a female. Yeah, it was real tough being a female back then. I mean, we had just gotten the right to vote in 1920, and African American women really weren't even included in that. So we're just 100 years into voting, but that's a whole nother other story. Maybe more on that to come. But Zora, people really weren't feeling her, and let me tell you why. Zora writes their eyes were watching God in something we call dialect. Do you guys know what that is? Dialect is the natural vernacular of African Americans. So if I were drop down in myself and go home and talk to my friends and family, I'm not going to be speaking to them in my teacher's voice. That's what you guys are hearing now. That doesn't mean that my accent will go away, because it won't. I'm from the South, and you can hear it. But listen, I'm going to explain how we get these Southern accents in another video. But right now, back to my point. When I'm talking to my friends and family, my voice sounds a little bit different. And y'all's do too. Like, we all say y'all. That's a Southern thing. But when you're talking to your friends and family, you be like, yo, what up though? Like, the language is different. The vernacular is different. And depending on the city and the state, wherever you are, it's going to change a little bit. It's called informal language. It's not the standard English that you're going to use when you're in a business setting or when you're having to make yourself plain for everyone around you. So this home language, or this relaxed language, for some is called Ebonics. Some people unintelligently call it ghetto, but in writing it's called dialect. The dialect is the way they spoke at the time. So you know how you are texting someone and you'll say LOL, BRB, TTYL, that kind of language? It's texting language, right? So the dialect is the language of the day, and it's written in such a way that you can hear how the people would have sounded when they spoke. Now, this caused Zora Neale Hurston a whole lot of issues. Yes, it did. Because people thought, oh my gosh, we don't want people reading this and thinking that we don't have any sense. Are you kidding me? We can read. We have literacy. We've been to college, a lot of us. We're learned people, and we don't want to look bad. Racism was still rampant. Racism was still everywhere. And African Americans were unfairly judged at every turn. So you can understand why they didn't want people publishing works that made it seem like we didn't have enough sense to talk. So Zora got a lot of flack. But Zora didn't care. Zora kept on writing. And you will notice that she is a masterful writer. I mean, poetic. Oh my gosh, she uses metaphors and similes and personification. And she is a beast with the pen. Oh my Lord. She is so good with language, y'all. And she kept it true to the people, which is extraordinary because you can see and hear the people in her writing. You can see what they would have looked like, and you can hear the music in their expressions, the way they would have expressed themselves, the rhythm in it. You can hear, all because Zora Neale Hurston made a simple choice to stay true to the people she was writing about, the people of Eatonville, Florida, a black town, which was her town, her people. And she wanted people to be proud of the people she was proud of. She wrote the book that way, not to embarrass anyone, but to celebrate African Americans in their natural state. So when you read the book, understand that she made this very real choice on purpose so that we could celebrate a person in the fullness of who they are. And that's what she does. She celebrates them. So we hear that musicality and we hear the joy. For the first time, African Americans got to be in love. You knew who their best friends are, what they thought about by themselves. And it made sense. and it sounded like poetry. For the first time, really and truly, you understood, not only in Zora's writing, but all the writings of that time, that people loved. Black people, we loved. We loved our mothers, our children. You understood what it felt like to have a crush, to get married, to be disappointed, to talk to God, to be judged by God and God alone. You understood the private thoughts that no one had ever cared about before. So, enough of me talking. You got a little bit of background. I'm going to include some videos so you can watch those too. I'm going to put a little music in there. Yeah. You're going to get to enjoy everything, but most of all, enjoy Their Eyes Were Watching God. Enjoy Zora Neale Hurston's writing. Enjoy Janie. Enjoy Tea Cake. Listen, one of my favorite books. You all enjoy it, and I'm going to enjoy it with you. If you have any questions, drop a comment or a link below or a comment, and I may hit you up with another lecture. All right, y'all. Enjoy.